I want to bring on the program Dan Backer now, the treasurer and counsel for the Committee to Defend the President Super PAC. Dan, it is good to have you back on the program. Thanks for taking the time tonight.
No, thanks for having me back.
What have we learned about the way that Hillary Clinton was able to launder literally tens of millions of dollars of campaign money?
Oh, boy, this is a doozy. And let me apologize, first of all, because campaign finance law is incredibly complex. Not a bug.
I don't mind any of that, and my audience loves hearing the details.
Fantastic. So let me start by saying what you can do completely legally. You as an individual can donate $2,700 to a candidate per election. You as an individual can donate $10,000 to a state party committee if you'd like, and as many of those state parties as you want. And last cycle, in 2016, you could donate $33,400 to a national party committee, the DNC, for example. And what you can do, and this is great, is you can create a joint fundraising committee where all these people work together, and I, as a donor, I wish I had this kind of money, but I could cut one check to the joint fundraising committee that equals the sum of my contribution limit to all these participants. And that is totally legal. And lastly, a state party can transfer an unlimited amount of its federal fundraising to a national party committee. So this is all entirely legal. The problem is, or at least for the Clintons, this is what they went and did, which is totally illegal. You may not earmark. So I, as an individual, cannot cut a check, say, to one committee and tell them or expect that they're going to give that money to somebody else. That's called earmarking, which has to be reported in a very different way. And if it exceeds my contribution limit to that end recipient, that's a straw man contribution. They prosecuted Dinesh D'Souza for about $20,000 of this back in 2012. By comparison, we're talking about $84 million. That's over 4,000 times more money in this case.
And by the way, Dan, I have to admit a dog in the fight. Dinesh is a friend of mine, and I would remind people that for the relatively minor crime of contributing some additional money to a friend's campaign where he had no real ability to gain financially from it. He was just doing it for an old college friend who was running for the Senate. I believe the total amount of his over contribution was $30,000. It may have even been a little less than that. They literally had him have to go to lockup every night for about 9 months down in San Diego, and it was an embarrassing and humiliating thing that they did to him. They also went way beyond what they normally do to others, but federal prosecutors under the Obama administration were demanding that they wanted him actually locked up in prison. So that's how hard they went after Dinesh for a relatively small amount of money, certainly less than $30,000.
Oh, absolutely. And so you can't make one of these earmark contributions, and you can't do them through straw men. What's more important is that if you're a fundraiser, if you're working for a political committee, you can't solicit these illegal contributions. So that's illegal. It's illegal to respond to that solicitation and give the money. That's illegal. And this is where it gets really fun for law nerds like me. The Joint Fundraising Committee got all these checks, these $300,000 checks from all these major Democratic super mega donor types.
Yeah.
And then what they reported was, say, for example, on October 1st, the Joint Fundraising Committee reported splitting that money up and sending it to all these state parties. And then the Democratic National Committee would then report on that same date, October 1st, getting that exact same amount of money from all these same party committees, always on the exact same date. But what happened in the middle, and this is how we came across this and figured all this out, is that some of these state parties, they didn't report getting this money. They didn't report sending the money to the DNC. They may have reported sending the money after the DNC reported getting it. And so what we figured out was that one of two things happened here. Either the Joint Fundraising Committee never actually sent any money to these state bank accounts because, crooked people always assume everyone else is crooked and they want to keep all the money. And they just sent it straight to the Democratic National Committee, in which case they filed false FEC reports. And then they had all these state party committees file false FEC reports by basically uploading Excel spreadsheets, and they missed a few because they didn't jive with their internal accounting. Or, and this seems to be the case from what Democrats are saying summer of 16, the Joint Fundraising Committee, whose treasurer and CFO was the Hillary treasurer, was transferring the money into these special bank accounts that have been set up, and then out of those accounts to the DNC. So they were handling both ends of the transaction, and the state parties never actually had control of it. And so what that means is they laundered all this money, this $84 million, through these state parties, at least on paper, and even in reality, it's still illegal. And they filed all these false FEC reports, and they did it intentionally, knowing this and pitching this to the donors. So all this money ends up at the DNC. So a couple of crimes are being committed right there. And then this is the doozy. The Democratic National Committee, as Donna Brazile, their former chairperson, said, they just put that money under the control of Brooklyn, of the Clinton campaign. That's completely illegal. That's a massive, excessive contribution. To put it in perspective, if I were to go to Hillary and say, hey, here's my bank account. I've got $10 million in it. You can tell me how you want it spent, and we'll spend that money for exactly how you say. That's an illegal contribution under the law. It's clear, black letter, illegal contribution. And so you have these individual donors responding to these unlawful solicitations and making unlawful contributions that were laundered through these state parties, who all filed these false reports under the penalty of perjury, who then ended up all this money at the DNC that was handed to the Clinton campaign, and it's effectively a massive, excessive contribution, 4,000 times bigger than what they prosecuted Dinesh D'Souza for. It is one of the most outrageously ballsy things I've ever seen in this law.
Now, let me ask you this, Dan. We've only got a couple of minutes to the end of the segment, and we're glad to have you back another time. But how well insulated is Hillary herself from this? And can she say, oh, this was done on my behalf, but it's not me? Or does this come back on her, and is it possible she could actually face some real penalties for having done this or been the beneficiary of this?
So there's very little case law about getting through these authorizing committees, especially when they're incorporated to the candidates. There's a little bit. But here's the interesting thing. If Hillary made the solicitation herself, and I got to believe if you're cutting a couple $100,000 check and you're Calvin Klein or you're Family Guy creator Seth MacFarlane, you are asking that Hillary's making that ask. So if she made that ask personally herself, which I think is very likely, then she's definitely on the hook personally. But even if she didn't make that ask, it's a lot harder to sort of get her into this mix. She's the authorized candidate. I mean, she's basically got to say that all this happened without her having any knowledge, which also means a lot of other people are going to have to fall on their swords for her. I just have a really hard time believing anybody feels like doing that.
And if she got in trouble for this, are there criminal penalties for this or only civil? Does it just mean she might have to pay a big fine? Because she and Bill are quite rich now.
Well, there's certainly going to be big fines galore because the fact that you have these two completely different sets of FEC reports that don't jive, there's an administrative fine process. There's millions of dollars of fines potentially there alone. You know yourself, the committee, so findings under the FEC are made against the committee and the treasurer in their official capacity, and candidates are known to make those checks themselves. So there could be a fine.
Dan, real quick,
herself, she could go to jail. But,
where can my listeners go read more of what you've put together?
Go to committee-to-defend-the-president.com, click the big button that says Hillary complaint, and you can read the whole complaint.
Dan, thank you very much, and Happy New Year to you and yours.